Right, we're here today with Dr. Pradeep Chadha, who I met online actually about a year ago. And what really drew my attention to wanting to meet and talk with Dr. Chadha was that he said he was a psychiatrist that worked with hypnosis. Now, this is, for me, revolutionary. So I was really, really curious. And what was interesting for him, and he will explain in a moment, was that I was an ex-schizophrenic, and somehow we managed to establish that between ourselves in private conversations. So I've invited Dr. Pradeep Chadha to interview me. So
I've always been curious to know about how a person suffering with schizophrenia would actually feel when they're suffering, and how they feel and what they feel, and how is it different when they get well. And the reason why that has been the case is because I've come across people in my career who, when they get admitted to the psychiatric hospitals, they find psychiatric hospitals quite traumatizing. And I learned of it only when I came out into private practice. As long as I was working in the hospital sector myself, we never gave a thought as psychiatrists to how traumatized people would feel when they get into a hospital. But coming across someone who has recovered from schizophrenia, it's usually not accepted in the psychiatric circles because it is supposed to be a condition that can never be treated. And invariably, I've heard of people getting better with, or well, or recovered with schizophrenia, or even with bipolar affective disorder, and I've come across people who have recovered. And the psychiatrist would end up saying it was a misdiagnosis initially. So what I did was I asked Jenny to send me over her notes. And the notes were written at a time when she was 23.
That's right.
Very young, so many, many years ago. But the interesting thing in the notes was that the psychiatrist, a senior man who I understand died during the time when these reports were being written, had categorically stated that I'm certain that the diagnosis for Jenny is schizophrenia. And that was interesting. So there was no going back on that if a person with schizophrenia has recovered. So there's no question of misdiagnosis. So here we are. I was curious, so here is the interview.
Great. So, fire away. Let's start with some questions.
Well, the first question, Jenny, I would like to ask you is, as a psychiatrist, stresses and strains we talk of before the illness strikes. Would you agree, or would you like to elaborate on the stresses and strains that were preceding the illness that happened? And yes, I read your notes that they're quite very typical schizophrenic.
Yeah, I think probably in the previous 3 or 4 years, I'd been under a terrible amount of pressure. I'd gone up to Liverpool to study a degree in Spanish and German, but I'd found myself through those 4 years with very little money and quite a chaotic life, really, because I was desperately trying to survive with little money and trying to make ends meet and trying to work at the same time and trying to hand in deadlines and everything. And I'd come from a background that didn't really believe in higher education, so I was also struggling against the moral code, or the ethical code, if you like, of my family. So it was quite a challenging time. But directly before, probably about 3 or 4 months before the schizophrenia started, I'd joined a spiritual circle. And in this circle we were not quite table tapping, but we were kind of attuning ourselves to different energies. And in this spiritual circle, I don't know how, and this was several months before the onset of any symptoms, I was picking up energies, sounds and vibrations and voices, and I could hear them, and I was passing them to people around the room. So I was already probably very sensitized. I was waking up in a big way. I had practiced Buddhism for a few years, not terribly diligently, but it had been something that was quite central to my life. So I was kind of fairly familiar with the whole spiritual thing, but I think one of the major problems I had at the time was because of this terrible disruption in my life with, all the struggle to achieve something. I'd become quite a bad insomniac. So I was terribly sleepless, and I found it very hard to drag myself through the day and actually achieve all the goals and aims that I wanted to. So that led up to the schizophrenic episode.
That's very interesting, Jenny, because there's a gentleman, a British psychiatrist named Sanderson, if I remember correctly. He has written papers on spiritual appeasement or spiritual releasement therapy, because he and I have come across other psychiatrists as well. They have a theory, it's so-called theory, that people who are possessed of so-called spirits, they tend to become very, very ill, and they can become ill. Now, that's one part of it. But on the other hand, as far as the spiritual practices are concerned, not very many people realize that when there are tensions in the body and there are emotions that are locked up in the body, that when people start to practice meditation or spiritual practices, which relaxes the body, then those bottled up emotions tend to become more magnified because the body wants to get rid of them. And it's not unknown that many people, when they start to meditate and they come from very stressful kind of backgrounds, then they become psychotic.
That's one way of looking at it. I mean, our form of Buddhism, or the form of Buddhism that I practice, is actually chanting. So we don't meditate, we don't go inwards in the same way. But the way I saw it, and this is how I've understood it myself, was that I had a very immature intellect at the time. I'd come from a background that didn't promote intellectualism. It didn't understand it. So I came from a background that had quite a limited idea of intellectualism, if you like. And so my intellectual brain was quite unpracticed, even though I was aspiring to be educated and so on and so forth. And I felt that these emotions that were coming up, these stresses that were coming up in my body, that my left-brained intellect just couldn't contain it. The energies were just too great. Now, there is an argument that perhaps the chanting did cause that, but I think I've also read some research that, sleeplessness and the disordered thinking and the complete, breakdown of being able to organise your thoughts because of sleeplessness is kind of like a precursor to schizophrenia. And I think probably a mix of, suppressed emotions, sleeplessness, and my immature intellect just couldn't contain the experiences of my life at that time, and it just went completely offline. So my cognitive faculties just disappeared. They just disintegrated, really. They couldn't make sense of the emotional quality of what I was experiencing at the time. And of course, it feels like a huge energy surge. To be at that point in my life was incredibly energetic, immense amounts of energy. In fact, I think my notes said, and you've read them, that she has far too much energy, and that's what she's complaining of. And incredible energy. It was like bursting out of every pore of my body, and my left brain was desperately trying to make sense of it, and it couldn't. It was just broken. And so the left brain then starts interpreting this kind of weird energy in kind of really bizarre associations. It just doesn't understand it. It can't make sense of it. It tries really hard. But even as you are in that state and the energy is coursing through you, you still know that it's not making sense, but you can't think of it any other way. Do you know what I mean? I think human instinct is you want to try and keep yourself safe, and the left brain is really important to make sense of the world,
On that note, in hindsight, now that you're well and you've been well for so many years, in hindsight, what do you remember of those experiences? What are written in the notes with regard to how you were behaving at that time? What kind of memory do you have? And what's your interpretation of that memory now?
Well, I'm full of smiles about it, because it was a wonderful time. I loved it. on the one hand, obviously, it was very threatening, and I was out of my depth, and I couldn't make sense of the world. But on the other hand, the energy that I felt was incredibly expansive. So I felt much bigger than me. I felt very, very big, and I remember doing kind of Tai Chi movements or various strange movements around the room, and I could sense everybody's energy. I was very, very sensitive, so I felt I could feel people's energy coming off them. And if you look at the graph, with the electromagnetic fields around the heart center, people are emanating energy up to, I think, 10 meters. So, on a real scientific level, you can evidence that. But I was actually feeling it. I could feel people's energies. And I knew when you'd go into the day room and you'd stand around with all these mental health patients, and I just knew which ones were about to turn around and hit me and which ones were going to be quite calm and docile. So I just knew, and so it was incredibly energizing. It felt very exciting, actually. And then when I felt that during my time in hospital, I burnt off a lot of creativity, and so I did a lot of drawing, I did a lot of writing. The writing didn't make much sense. It was all jumbled, jargoned writing that to me seemed to make a lot of sense, but to nobody else didn't make any sense at all. I did a lot of movement. I remember doing some movement. I remember having this obsession with the fact that I couldn't cross the water. I couldn't cross the water. And it was something to do with a river. I couldn't cross the water. And it got to the stage where I couldn't stand in the water either. So when it came to bath time, I couldn't get in the water. I couldn't get in the water. There was something dangerous about being in the water. And I remember some of the patients that were with me, and they made me laugh. And I remember Tony. Tony was depressive, and he was in for a while, and he was one of the only patients there who really got me. He really got me. He was somebody who got me. The doctors didn't have a clue. The psychiatrists didn't know. The nurses were kind, but they didn't know. They didn't know what was going on.
That was actually the next question I was going to ask you, because you would be in the company of people who would be caring for you in the psychiatric profession.
Yeah.
So from your angle at that time, with all this energy that you're mentioning, and they are trying to help you and help you curtail that energy. Yeah. What did you feel about them? What was going on?
Okay. Well, I was angry with them at times because they just didn't get it. They would, give me my drugs and tell me that I had to take them, and I'd say I don't want to because they taste like poison or they make me feel ill. And they'd say, well, if you don't take your drugs, we're going to inject you. And of course, I didn't want to be injected, so I took my drugs. And then, of course, you have to stick your tongue out and to show them that you've taken your medicine. But generally speaking, they were very blind. The staff didn't know. They couldn't have no concept of what was really going on. And there was one doctor, Dr. White, who asked me a number of questions, and he seemed to fire them at me, one after the other, and my head was so full of stuff, energy. I was desperately trying to work things out, and I was sensing all these energies from people and sensing the words even that people were thinking. Sounds a bit bizarre, but that's what it feels like. And he kept firing these questions at me, and I just said, stop. I can't answer them all. You're asking me too many questions. And he probably wasn't firing them at me, but he wasn't giving me time to answer one of them before the next one came. It was almost like he didn't, there was no one, it was almost like he didn't believe there was anyone at home. I wasn't actually there. Okay. But I was there. I absolutely was there. I was very much there.
Because it's usually taken that if a person has lost touch with reality, then they have lost touch with reality.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But I was in a reality of my own,
You were schizophrenic.
Yeah. I was schizophrenic.
Yes.
Yeah, and exactly. So it amuses me now. I look back on it with great fondness. I can't tell you why. I think it's probably because it's so far behind me and it's so metabolized. I don't reflect on it at all. But I do remember feeling there were some people who just didn't get it. The energies were all wrong. I could just feel they had no insight. They knew nothing of what I was feeling. It was like I was in a little world of my own, which I was, but that I was connected up to something much more meaningful than they had. There was nothing meaningful in the way they were treating me.
What about your relationship with other people who were inpatients as well?
Yeah.
What do you remember of that? How did that interaction is
It was
remembered?
curious. Thank you for asking that. And I'll tell you why. There were one or two that I could just see and know they knew what I was feeling. I just knew they knew, and I knew they knew, and they knew they knew, and it was almost like them and us.
Now, that would be called as psychotic in typical psychiatric terms. You know, but I don't know.
Okay. Meaning, who would say that to who?
Well, basically, when we tend to compare behavior and thinking according to the norms of society.
Yeah.
So if I, as a physician or as a person who is trying to do my job, cannot hear the voices that you can hear, and you are the only one out of hundred thousands and millions who can hear voices, then obviously there's something wrong with you.
Absolutely. Well, you know, my thoughts were quite disordered, and I'll accept that, and I wasn't terribly functional in the world. But I think my experience, my senses were very, very real. And I think what had happened was that my left brain had just lost the capacity to order it properly. But what I was sensing was incredibly real. So, you know, the other patients there, I could sense, you know, we knew. That's all I can say. It was difficult to describe it any other way, really.
So basically your senses were heightened.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
Okay, heightened senses in mental illness is one issue. Heightened senses are also spoken about, read about, discussed about in spiritual literature as well.
Sure.
There's an awareness. The word awareness is very commonly used. And awareness means heightened awareness. That's an extreme. When people meditate, when they are doing meditation and they become enlightened, they become very relaxed. Stress and heightened senses. Now that's a totally opposite picture in this spectrum.
Yeah.
What's your understanding of the awareness in spirituality and the heightened sensitivity in the ill condition?
I think with the heightened senses in spirituality, you are going there willingly, and you are going there with the permission of your left brain. And your left brain or your analytical brain is quite happy to surrender and allow the spiritual experience to express itself. With schizophrenia, the left brain is desperately not wanting to let go of the experience. It is not giving permission at all. But despite that, the spiritual energy is very high.
So in spiritual awareness, you cannot shut down that awareness unless you stop doing meditation, for example. And that means you stop growing. In your view, in your experience with heightened sensitivity in schizophrenia, what helped you other than medication to stop it or to change things?
This is the question, isn't it? It's the $1 million question. How did I get well? Is that what you mean?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I have to say to start with, I was given Stelazid. I think I was given lithium, would it have been lithium to start with? For a few days or maybe a week, and that completely paralysed me. And then they physically paralysed me. My brain was still racing, but I couldn't move. Stelazine, then I called my upper with a little tiny white pill that came with it. I can't remember what that was called. I called that my downer. And then eventually they realised that this Stelazine was really giving me lots of energy. I felt very excitable on stelazine, so they put me then on haloperidol with pracyclidine as the antidote. And I think within a couple of, maybe a week of being on this haloperidol, my energy sunk. I suddenly felt like I had no energy left. So something shifted energetically. Now, what happened then was I was allowed, and I don't know whether it was just Liverpool, because I was in Liverpool Sefton General Hospital, I was allowed a lot of creative expression. So I did a lot of writing, I did a lot of painting, a lot of drawing, a lot of movement. And I felt like I was just expiating issues, that I felt like stuff was coming out symbolically in the way I was working. Now, what happened then was I eventually stabilised, to coin a term, and they transferred me to Essex from Liverpool, and I went into another hospital that was so awful. The food was disgusting, the ward was awful, the system was terrible. I'm sorry to say it, but the doctors were awful. I just really was unhappy there, and I couldn't wait to get out. So within 3 weeks, my parents had been absolutely desperate to get me home. They got me back into my parents' home. And once I got in there, I started to realise that I was back in control of my life. And I seriously believe that, I think possibly because I came out of one environment and into another, and I was really desperate to get home, and then my decision to just stop taking the drugs. That was my decision. It wasn't overseen by psychiatry at all. I just felt terribly clumsy and uncomfortable on these drugs, and I decided to stop taking them. And this is the logic I used. I never used to have them.
But the danger of doing that is actually, it could be quite costly. And that is not possible for everyone else to do.
No. Okay, I accept that. I think in my case, I had spent quite a number of years developing, despite my breakdown, developing quite a strong sense of myself, possibly through Buddhism, and probably also through my experiences, because it had been a real struggle to get to university from the background that I came from. So I think there had been some residual strength in me. So I acknowledge and accept that it's not right for everybody, but for me, I stopped taking the drugs, and within a week I stopped feeling clumsy. I started to sleep like it was going out of fashion, because prior to my onset of schizophrenia I was very, very sleepless. And I think also, I would argue perhaps being in my family's home again, back at my parents' house, was relatively stabilising. At least I knew where I was. But the following year was actually still quite traumatic. I still had lots of change ahead of me. But I managed quite firmly to just keep hold of my faculties. I didn't feel any struggle going on. I didn't feel I was having to battle with myself to stay in control. I just felt a natural sort of release, like I was relaxing, like all the tension that stress that I'd been under was just slowly dissolving and releasing.
So was there ever a need for you to go back on medication again once you started to do your meditation and follow your Buddhism?
I never went back. So I never took another antipsychotic drug.
On that note, Jenny, you mentioned you were full of energy and you were trying to express that energy. A hypothetical question. If at that time you had other avenues to get rid of that energy, eventually medication was needed to slow you down. If you had avenues to get rid of that energy constructively, safely, do you think you would have never become psychotic? Or what do you think would have been the outcome of the situation?
Do you mean because you perceived that I had this pent-up energy that I then turned itself into schizophrenia? It's a difficult question, that one, because part of me feels I just had to go through it. It was part of my path. So it's difficult to imagine what the alternative could have been. I had no other support around me.
But had you, hypothetically, had someone offered you skills to burn out that energy that was bubbling up and wanted to express itself, as you said,
Yeah.
you were doing a lot of art stuff and other things and expressing yourself.
Yeah. Possibly. I think had somebody shown me how to use the energy, it would have helped, and it would probably have diverted the schizophrenia. But I think the energy was impossible to really quantify at the time.
I'll tell you why I'm asking this question.
Yeah, please, yeah.
Because there are two schools of thought here, in the Western world specifically.
Yeah.
Eastern world is quite clear about it.
Okay.
You express and you express.
Right.
But in the Western world, there are two schools of thought.
Yeah.
And one of them is you don't express yourself.
Okay.
And the other thought is the Eastern kind, so-called. Yes, you need to express yourself.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, that's why I'm asking this question. Had you had the opportunity to spend that energy, was there a chance that that situation would have arrived, that you would have been needing medication?
Yeah, of course. I think, if I'd had the right avenues around me at the time and somebody to help me with my internal conflict, because really the conflict that was going on inside me was, I really need to succeed, and yet I'm absolutely shattered. I'm an insomniac and I can't fail. I can't fail at this. I have to succeed. I've spent 4 years of my life studying. I can't fail. And then pushing myself. And, that internal conflict created a lot of dissonance and a lot of stress and a lot of, I guess, energy eventually,
Yeah, that's very relevant. It's something which is very common, because I do come across people all the time who fail to realize what they're doing with their lives. And are pushing themselves harder and harder because the demands of work, the demands at home, demands of society. And one of the very common words two common words, have to.
Yeah.
I have to.
Yeah.
I should be doing this.
Yes, absolutely.
So should be doing this, have to do this.
Yeah.
From what I'm gathering from you is that these were the issues that were pushing you to push more and more.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And if you look at from a therapist point of view, because obviously now I'm an integrative therapist, bizarrely as that might seem, but from that point of view now, shoulds and have tos are parental instructions. You should. It's about societal instructions, isn't it? You should, in order to be an upstanding member of society, you should be doing this. You have to do that. And these imperatives, drive us.
So the one question that has been coming into my mind has been, if you were to suggest to people who are watching, professionals who could be watching this video, as to what do you think could they have done to make you get better sooner? Or what could you have expected from them that they did not do? What would be the message?
Do you know, the one thing is to just create space and to listen, to really hear what your patients are going through. And I think that's almost an impossible, certainly in our Western society, where we are so driven by academia, left brain intellectualism, observation, scientific knowledge, to actually observe, to take part in somebody's dilemma, their stresses and patient experience, for the Western psychiatrist or Western trained nurses is really quite, you don't do that. It has to be left brain, observational, scientific knowledge, and that is a killer. That attitude actually keeps people iller for longer.
So do you mean to say that if there would be an emotional input in the services?
Totally, yeah.
It would help a lot?
Yes, absolutely. The space, the emotional availability of staff, of psychiatry, not just, ticking a few tick boxes and, trying to keep themselves happy. It does nothing for us as patients, absolutely nothing.
I remember on that note, I mentioned elsewhere as well, there was a nurse colleague of mine, and we were just doing our work, and I said to her name was Mary. I said, Mary, I was working in the drug unit at that time. Mary, I find in all my experience, what I've learned till now is that people who come into the unit, this unit or any other psychiatric unit, one thing is common in all of them, and that is that they feel unloved. And she turned around and said, Dr. Chadha, I wish things could be that easy.
It is that easy. It is that easy. And I think an acceptance of difference as well, and not trying to medicate people into some idea of what is normal. People have to go through these life experiences sometimes. They don't need to be labelled and drugged up and sent off packing with, 25 years worth of drugs. They don't need that. They need to be heard, to be seen, to be accepted, and to be loved. I think you're right.
So basically you're saying is that all these experiences that people tend to have in psychiatry, if they tend to keep them and have them as learning experiences and move forward in life, then they can, to a certain extent, it is possible, but not to simply leave it to the rest of the world to help them to do what they feel that they cannot do, which they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, people can recover. They can recover. Arguably, the drugs, the pharmaceuticals keep them ill because it stops them passing naturally through challenges in life.
But there are cases, Jenny, and I've come across them, which, in which cases you simply do need drugs.
Okay. I'm sure there are. But I would say that.
But not all.
No, but I would say that's got to be the minority.
That I agree with.
Yeah, and that the majority of drugs that are prescribed nowadays are really just, an abuse of human rights, actually.
Maybe as someone would say, time-saving devices.
Yes, yeah, okay.
There's a lot of talk with regard to meditation and spirituality that can play a role or cannot play a role in psychiatric illnesses or conditions. You have come from a journey in which you were psychiatrically ill, took the help of spirituality and come out of it. Would you think that it is possible for everyone to do it? Would you think that this is one of the alternatives?
To use spirituality to help get well. Okay. I'm not sure how much I used spirituality at the time. I think the lead up to it and the subsequent re-establishment of it after I'd recovered were two different things. But I think everyone, every single person, this is my belief, okay, I've got no evidence, but this is how I feel, is capable of being healthy and well mentally and emotionally, and to not have to suffer bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, or schizoaffective, anything at all. I think everyone has the capacity to be completely well. The question is, how do you do it? Okay.
The other question that's coming to my mind is, in your view, in your personal view, you have been helped by the professionals. You have helped yourself. In your personal view, who holds the responsibility for getting well and becoming well and staying well?
That's a really difficult question. Ultimately, it's ourselves, the individual. Ultimately, it's us. We hold the responsibility for our health and our life and our well-being. The problem is that we are hypnotized by popular culture and popular ideas that permeate our whole culture. And we believe that it's other people's responsibility.
So you mean to say that the whole system is set up in such a way that it makes individuals dependent on the system?
Absolutely.
Believing that the system is the only way in which they can be helped.
Absolutely.
So they give up on life and say, okay, this is the only way to do things.
Completely.
And they stop trying or stop looking for newer
And the system plays into that dependency by claiming to be experts.
But at the end of the day, Jenny, there's a load that is being put on the system and a demand being put on the system which is undue. And the system is under actually a lot of pressure with regard to how much psychiatric services can do, how much the system can do. In that context, what would you like to convey to people who are suffering?
I would say help yourself as much as you can, because the system is just one interpretation of the way you are feeling. It is not the truth. It is an opinion. And seek other opinions. I don't mean medical opinions. I mean seek other people that have also recovered. Be curious. Be creative. Look for your own solutions, because the system, the medical system, is just one tiny aspect of your mental and emotional well-being. The rest of it is your responsibility.
So what you are saying is exploration is your choice.
Absolutely.
You don't explore, you don't get it.
Absolutely.
You explore, you will find some way.
Absolutely. Where there's a will, there's a way. And it's as simple as that.
Jenny, there is a lot of talk of various other alternatives, and nutrition and food has been mentioned many times. And there is a view, it's called an orthomolecular view of psychiatry.
I'm familiar with it.
And people vouch for it and say it works. And many people claim they have gone better with it. What's your angle on that? What do you think about the role of food in healing mental illnesses?
I can comment on mental and emotional well-being, because I've seen it in patients where I've had people come through to see me who are depressed and very upset and angry and bipolar and goodness knows what else. And I've suggested to them that they come off wheat or dairy or whatever, one or a number of things. And literally within days of headaches and the clarity afterwards, within days people report a clarity of mind they've not had before. Now, I don't know too much about supernutrition and schizophrenia. I know there is a whole lot to know about it, and I know there's lots and lots of research, maybe unofficial research, but there's lots of information out there. But I have no doubt in my mind that what you put into your body in terms of the vital energies that we consume to keep ourselves going impacts on our mental and emotional well-being. I have no doubt about that.
And do you feel, Jenny, if along with medication, as psychiatry is quite medically orientated, if nutrition would be another aspect that could be looked at, then things could be better without much drugs or many drugs?
Absolutely, 200%. But I also know that, nutrition, I think, is about half hour in a Western doctor's training compendium.
Limited,
it's very limited. So, so nutritional information from Western medicine is just not really prescribable. It doesn't earn any money.
On that note, I do remember that I read somewhere that vitamin B3 deficiency caused schizophrenia, was supposed to cause schizophrenia in half of people suffering with schizophrenia in the United States. And zinc is said to help in schizophrenia, especially when copper is in excess. And copper is supposed to be in excess cause schizophrenia. What would you say to that?
I have no idea, but I think, to anyone who's watching, explore it. Don't take one opinion for your well-being. Explore it. I bought a book a while ago called The Miracle of Magnesium, and that, magnesium is meant to help the synapses of the brain communicate with each other and all of it. And if your synapses aren't communicating with each other, then do something about it. Change your diet, put some magnesium into it, or copper or zinc or whatever. I think, no one person has your answer, and everyone is unique. And I think exploring nutrition and anything, other people's experiences, spirituality, anything that gives you a fuller life, as opposed to just going down the medical route, because the medical route is limited. By definition, it is not a holistic and healthy way of living. Drugs are poisons. There is no question they are poisons.
So you mean to say that if psychiatry would become more integrative, with drugs all right, but psychotherapy with nutrition, with herbs, with Ayurveda,
but with the respect as well. But it's not just about the treatment, it's about the people. The people need to learn how to be more human. Science has brought us a long way, but it hasn't made us more human. It's made us observe things more and stand back more and categorize and put things into boxes. But it's not actually made us any more human, and I think that's where it fails.
So people need to explore what is suitable for them. And then go along with it.
Absolutely.
Fair enough.
And trust yourself. Somewhere inside, you have the wisdom and you have the knowledge. Somewhere in your life, you know the answers. Your left brain and your head probably hasn't got a clue. So don't use it. Use something else. Use your spirituality. Just be open and start exploring what might work for you,
I do believe that people who think too much are more prone to psychiatric illnesses. That's my view, because the more you think, the more the mind gets cluttered. And the more stress you create for yourself. And the whole meditative process is about just sitting still, doing nothing.
Absolutely.
But we want to do something, so we have to do something.
Yeah. And I find, people that think too much or analyse too much are quite difficult to work with in many ways, because you have to kind of get underneath the analysis to reach the person, And the analysis is there to protect them. They don't want to work any deeper level, But
great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for interviewing me, Pradeep. It's been a pleasure.
It's a lesson for all of us, and I wanted to learn from you about your experiences, so it has been very nice.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thanks a lot.